Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, we're talking about Arsenal versus Manchester City. What did we learn about these teams from this game? What was so strange about Man City's performance and what do you expect us to take forward into the rest of the season? Then we talk about Liverpool. The season numbers are not as good as we'd expect, but should we expect that to continue? There is something else going on behind the scenes. Then we discuss Man United versus Chelsea. Nothing to see here. And a bunch of the other games from around the Premier League.
Plus, we discuss getting started on a career in analytics. What do data-minded people tend to miss, and where can they improve as they seek a career in the game? That's all on today's episode of The Transfer Flow. So hello, Ted. It's good to have you back. We're here for another Monday edition of the Transfer Flow podcast. How are you doing, first of all? Obviously, you made the mistake of saying something about Liverpool online while being known to be an Arsenal fan. This was not a wise move on your part, I've got to say.
See, here's the thing, though. Like, sometimes I'll say things about Arsenal, also being known to be an Arsenal fan, and the Arsenal fans get mad at me. So, like, there's no winning in this game. Like, just having any sort of opinion seems to be a net negative.
I mean, look, there's the assumption here, isn't there, that like everybody is intrinsically biased and that we all are just saying stuff to kind of get one over on other supporters. And people don't seem to recognize that. I mean, well, I guess I could technically operate that way, but if you operated that way, you would lose quite a lot of money, I think.
Yeah, that's a problem. So when professional gamblers are asking questions and trying to, like, figure out what their opinion should be, it's usually from a position of, can I win money if the current line looks like it does? And that is usually my position. And so asking questions about Liverpool's performance, their underlying metrics versus their league table position having not dropped a point so far this year felt like a useful exercise for someone from my perspective. For someone who wants a peaceful life, it was slightly less useful.
Sure. Oh, yeah, should we talk about like the actual point you were making itself as well? Like, I was going to leave it till later on, but actually I think it's worth kind of discussing because Liverpool's numbers are about fourth best in the league, but they have a perfect record. Salah is kind of playing like shit right now.
Ooh, harsh.
Like 0.3 expected goals and assists per 90 so far. It hasn't been a strong start for him. And so I guess the question here is like, okay, there's tons of talent on this team and we know how good they were last season. So do we assume that the metrics come up to match the talent, or do we assume that the results come down to match the metrics over time? And if my perception of what you were saying is this is the question before us.
Exactly.
What it was taken as was Liverpool aren't good and they shouldn't be top of the league, right?
Yeah, Liverpool fans are very defensive because they had a title-winning season last season where they weren't awesome, right? And like, you can't even dispute that they weren't awesome. They were fine. They were the best team in the league that year, but they didn't have 100 points or 99 points or 98 points or like 94 points or like any number of points that were like really, really awesome points. They were still good enough. It's a relative league. It's competitive. So when I was asking these questions, I'm like, okay, this is like really intriguing because, if you took their expected goals numbers, they would be kind of edge of the Champions League last year, like maybe even on the outside of it. Like, they're not great so far. And this is the thing. Like, so I just want to be clear. Like, I'm very happy to give them credit. Like, I posted a tweet about what they did to Atletico Madrid where they crushed them. Like, that was not a close match and the Burnley match also, like, not really a close match from all of the underlying metrics. It's just the timing of it. Everybody got confused by. But people are like, oh, well, they've scored late every single game and like they've just got this magic about them. And like what we've seen from historic evidence is that magic is very rarely sustainable. And for someone who's gambling on this and trying to figure out, like, is this team likely to beat this team by so many goals every single week? Sustainability, repeatability, predictability are things that like we're looking for. So some of the objections that I got are also like quite interesting. People are like, oh, well, they're betting in all these new players. They changed this, they changed that. First of all, they didn't change their head coach. So like they've got consistency across that. Second of all, everybody else is betting in new players too. It was one of the busiest transfer seasons we've ever seen. And so they're not the only ones. I mean, I don't know if Liverpool fans know this, but Newcastle didn't actually have their primary starting forward for the first like 3-4 matches of the season.
Newcastle without Isak and Downerman. They played Bournemouth, the first game of the season, who were just like missing half the 11.
Let's just replace
Arsenal
all of our defenders and face the best attacking team in the league. Man, that seems like fine.
And Arsenal without Saliba, Ugo, Saka, and Havertz. I mean, this is the case for everybody. I mean, the one thing that I think is interesting is you could definitely make an argument that Slot has. I know that Liverpool fans don't like to believe this. They believe that only other teams can be conservative. But maybe Slot's being conservative while the attack gets kind of bedded in, and perhaps also recognizing that he's got quite a thin defense. Like last season, they were conceding over one expected goal a game, which is like okay if you want to compete for the title, right?
This season, they're at like 0.8. That would be a huge improvement if they can sustain that and the attack gets firing. Like that would make a lot of sense to me. But right now, the simple fact is these are what the numbers look like. It's descriptive, right? It's not you saying there's a moral case to be made here that like Liverpool don't deserve to win the league because they're playing badly or they don't deserve 15 points. It's just that the numbers are not that great right now.
Right. And in the second half of the season, the attack could click and they could have like an expected goal difference of like over a goal a game. And then you'd be like, yeah, they're awesome. Like they deserve to have that status. We don't know. And it's okay. It's okay to ask questions, I think is the important thing, regardless of what your fandom happens to be. You know, we ask questions about Arsenal all the time. And in fact, like in historic seasons, I have been just the fucking harbinger of doom for Arsenal fans around Christmas time so many times.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the experience of being an Arsenal fan. You're either somehow disloyal, you're like a traitor, or you're, just a super biased kind of booster. But with, the important thing with Liverpool is that if Liverpool aren't great right now, but they have a 5-point advantage on the league, that gives them a big runway to get things motoring. Like they can drop a bunch of points and still be about level with their rivals. Like even if things go wrong, even if they got an injury to one of their centre backs, which I think would be pretty disastrous, they're unlikely to be that far off the top by January, and then they can recruit a centre back. Like they've given themselves so much room to work things out. Like that's the thing I would be taking as a Liverpool fan from this, rather than everybody's predicting that I don't know, that everyone's against us, blah blah blah. It's like no one's against you guys. Just calm down.
Yeah. I mean, you've had some good fortune in your tough matches so far this season. And the other thing that people had objections like, it hasn't been about an average start to, in terms of their strength of schedule. Like, first of all, they had 3 home matches. Does playing at Anfield matter or not? The Liverpool fans would say it definitely matters, right? And so would the long-term gambling people, unless it's COVID time. Like home field advantage is usually a pretty consistent, significant thing. So playing at Anfield does matter. All right, there. So you've had 3 games at Anfield and 2 games away. One of those games away, you had a red card for the opposition for like a long time. You also, were in the process of gently prying their center forward out of his home when he went on hunger strike or whatever we're talking about. And and then I don't know. It's fine. I'm not being mean about this team. I think this team is very, very good. I said very nice things about them in the transfer grades. Like I said that it was one of the most impressive transfer off seasons that we've ever seen. They spent nearly 300 million or more than 300 million on 3 players alone. And yet, like, you're like, I don't think that's that bad. They were pretty awesome, right? And so Leonie's kind of the open question there. Like, is he good? Well, he's 18 and he looks like a physical unit, but he's also 18. and he played in Italy last year, quite a very, very different league. Might take him a little while to get up to speed, but thankfully they had 2 of the most impressive center backs in the world last season continue to play very well for them. So I do think that Slot is being conservative. I do wonder if it's going to bite him in the ass. Like, it's not like certain other conservative head coaches have not had this thing bite them in the ass.
Sure.
and like, we'll talk about them in a second. If you wanted to put this from a different context of fans that don't seem to get angry about everything, although they did get angry at Kim recently for what Kim said. Like, if you say Forest last year, and we looked at Forest numbers and you're like, ooh, I don't think they're going to sustain that league position. Like that looks very fortunate. and then not only do they not sustain the league position, but they also fired their head coach because like the ownership, which is a bit volatile, also thought that they weren't going to maintain that league position into the next season. So, yeah, long story short, if you wanted to just take some perspective away and look at Liverpool in the same lens as we looked at Nottingham Forest, who don't get angry every time you talk about their team, then it's the same set of questions. It's just one team has a bit more talent and a little bit better and a hell of a lot more points.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, look, to be honest, you've only got yourself to blame.
Yeah, I know.
I looked at that tweet and I was just like, my man, what are you doing? You're asking for a horrible time.
I was pumping the algorithm. That's what I was doing.
Yeah,
look at me
that's
go.
True. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, on the topic of the transfer grades, if anybody hasn't checked those out, then please do make sure that you sign up for the Transfer Flow newsletter, because we've had all the Premier League transfer grades come out over the course of last week. Those can still be read online, transferflow.com. But we will also have transfer grades coming out for a bunch of the big teams around Europe as well. So if you're intrigued to see what we thought of the various moves across the continent, then you will be able to check those out in forthcoming editions. Transfer grades, I mean, look, I was not involved in the transfer grades. I did have to weigh on some things that I saw.
I think you're a neutral party observer in this case. Like you're just like watching from afar and like I don't know if I agree with that. So like this is fun. We get to get your take from the outside, also inside of our company, but you didn't have to do any of that nonsense. And then you can have my take, which also didn't necessarily agree with everybody else. We had some pretty significant departures in certain grades. So it was fun. Last year, these were the thing that people, I think, one of the features that people appreciated most on the newsletter. Again, I think it was well appreciated, but certain fan bases, as usual, were less than happy with us, or were really unhappy with their team's business and the people who were running it, which we can help with that. It's probably going to be a middle 7 to 8 figure sum in order to get us involved. But, I can definitely save that in the first season for Manchester United in a heartbeat. Like I'll just actually negotiate prices and wages as opposed to like, oh, what do you want to make? Cool. That's good. That's cool.
It's the there's no way to just say the same stuff that we've said with United. But even 10 years ago, I remember saying you could sit me down with who scored and I could save Man United money. Like, honestly, just by being like, no, don't do that.
That's a bad idea.
No,
I wouldn't do that.
No,
are you
don't
sure?
Pay him that. He's crap.
Yeah,
don't do that.
I don't agree.
Like, you guys heard of discipline? Like think about it.
No.
But the transfer grades, I mean, yeah, I thought I saw Hayden's grade. Hayden gave Nottingham Forest an A on incomings. Just a spoiler alert to everyone. And I was just like, I look at the list of Nottingham Forest incomings and I can smell the detergent through the screen. Just like, no, thank you, my friend. Like, which is not to say I dislike all their players. That's the other thing, right? That sometimes it's like, we like this player, fine, but we hate this fit. So like Donnarumma, perfectly fine goalkeeper. Is he a good fit for Manchester City? That's a much more complicated question, and I think a much dicier answer. Like there's all sorts of stuff like this. Or is it okay? Is it okay to spend £55 million on this player? That's a very different question from, is this player a scrub? There are very few scrubs in the Premier League, but there are lots of players who should not cost £55 million.
Right. And it was kind of a weird year in that the rest of Europe, like significantly lower for the last 2 seasons, and like prices have really stabilized. Premier League have a 2 to 3x premium, but in the Premier League, Premier League, then like completely fucked their external prices as well, because basically they're like, oh, you'll pay for like, a 65th percentile player and you're going to pay 55 million for him. Well, we're going to charge you 75 million to get an actual good player that might not be as good in the Premier League. You don't know, but we're going to make sure that you pay full price for that. It was a very weird and undisciplined summer from a couple of teams that then kind of wrecked some of the other teams, or push prices higher for teams that were happy to sell some of their players and were very sort of strict about not wanting to let them go. So I think that the summer was really intriguing. I think that overall there were very, very few dumb moves. Like really almost all of the idiotic moves are gone from the Premier League. Not to say that there weren't some that was like, that price is just obscene. But yeah, it's like way different than 10 years ago by like miles and miles and miles. So that's been really interesting to watch, but it doesn't mean that, we can't have opinions and we can't watch people, make moves that should have been either much earlier, which would have saved them future headaches or like quite a bit of money, or just make moves that you're like, this is not going to solve your problem. Like, this is clearly desperation.
It's so funny though, like looking at this stuff and then thinking like the opinions that I have on here and then the opinions I have sometimes when I'm on another football podcast, where I just say like any old shit that I want. Like here I'm like, I need to be able to defend this argument. And sometimes I'm just kind of, whereas in other realms you think like, this is pure vibes. So I feel sad now, seeing the way the season has started, that I backed off some of my takes, like in the previews, for example. So when we had to submit our preview list and then those were averaged out, I had Villa as 9th. And I think they averaged out to something like 6th, but I wish I'd kind of gone harder there. On the other hand, on another thing, I also had Sunderland to stay up, which now I'm also kind of thinking about. That's kind of interesting too. But with Brighton as well, I thought everyone was really kind to them in the transfer grades. And again, I don't really take issue with the players that much. So I think the Calper is kind of a huge downgrade on Estupinian. But to me, I guess that is one as well where I think I'm significantly more negative than everybody else.
I don't think Brighton's business was bad. I think that they do need to change their head coach. Like that experiment has gone on long enough. And like I've already said it in the newsletter like a week before. So
Fraud.
Not every risk pays off. So I think the Brighton's business seemed fine. I actually liked the Calper, and I like the idea that like he's going to be able to bring them some level of creativity around that side that isn't just runny. But they do need to get a different head coach that is able to calm the yips that they have in the back, because like their mistakes look Chelsea-like from last season, when Chelsea, like in the first half of the season, their center backs were just really, really struggling to get play rolling there. Villa's an interesting one. Like Villa very clearly look like someone has turned off the money spigot, and I think they got stuck with that. I heard a rumor recently, kind of around the way behind the scenes, that like one portion of that ownership group might have been looking to sell to someone else, which would explain why a money spigot may have been turned off. I don't have any confirmation around that, but it smells right. Like when you look at what they've done previously, and it was like, oh, the magic money tree is continuing to flow. And then they're like, they can't make any moves and they're stuck. Not to say that they shouldn't be a lot better than they currently are, because that squad is not bad. It might be slightly aged, but if you looked at probably 10 other squads in the Premier League, you're like, I would definitely take Villa's. It's more interesting. Who else did you have on that list that was funky?
Palace have been very, very quietly pretty damn good. I think I had them as like 6th or 7th in my predictions, which I was aware was kind of punchy. They hadn't sold Eze at the time. They have had an easy schedule, but they've quietly got somewhere around the 2nd, 3rd best expected goal difference in the league. Attack is 3rd best. Defensive is 5th best. I mean, it is kind of Mateta Sarr right now. Pino's only played a little bit, though he's very good in the minutes he's played. Like they do just look pretty solid. And I think, we've all said, wow, look at the turnover at Bournemouth. This is a huge feather in Iraola's cap that they still look up to the level of last season. I think that absolutely applies to Palace as well. And we've also seen with Palace them come through periods where things have not been working for them, and Glasner can steady it, make some changes, and get them rolling again. Like you've pointed out, they love to draw. It's all they do. They love to get draws. But this weekend, they went to West Ham. They were away at West Ham, and they absolutely battered them. It was like 18 shots to 8, 2.1 XG to 0.6 away at West Ham. Like West Ham, I mean, they're a different kettle of fish, but to get pummeled like that at home by Palace says something very significant about West Ham, but I think it also says something pretty significant about Palace, that they just expect to roll over those teams now.
I'm not sure. I think, first of all, they are very, very lean. I think that is also another team that saw ownership changes this summer that didn't actually seem to clarify the ownership of the group anymore, because there's still like this sort of 3-4 tentacled monster there. And so it seems like they either have cash flow problems or are afraid to like reinvest at any significant level. So I would say that if they end up with an injury to their front line, like they'd be in trouble. It's possible if they had an injury to like Aguehi, they'd be in trouble as well. But, they didn't take the money on offer either of the last 2 summers for him, which is a funky choice. I don't understand. I like Glasner, but I think that Glasner like has the same issue that certain other elite head coaches are, which is that like, he isn't risk forward enough. Like the 3 points versus the 1 point is quite significant difference over the course of the season. And he probably views it as 1 point versus 0 points a lot of times. And you're like, yeah, well, that only has to work out so many times for you to still be ahead. No, I quite like him. I think he's a good head coach. We've said that many times. I'm cautious on that because I do think that schedule has been soft. I think that their lack of game changing and depth like may bite a bunch in the later season and keep them in that middle of the pack as opposed to allowing them to go higher.
Well, I think that's true in the end. I think that after they sold Eze and they didn't get in a centre back, a depth centre back, which they were really trying to do. They got in one, but I think they were trying to get another. Like I wouldn't have rated them so highly when I was ranking Premier League teams, but I do think they're just pretty good and pretty hard to play against. And I think it's 2 goals conceded. They haven't scored a lot, but 2 goals conceded so far this season. I'm interested. I'm very interested. The other thing that I'm kind of excited about is like there have been a bunch of signings made over the last few years, and I think this applies to Villa as well, who then we didn't actually see that much of. And now it certainly felt last season like a load of those squad players who previously would have got no game time at all, we can now expect that they will get pretty significant game time just because of the relentlessness of the schedule. So I'm hoping that we'll see, Romain Esse, for example, come into that team and get some decent minutes. Similarly at Villa, I think it's reasonable to make the point that we brought in Maatsen and Onana and Marlon and all these guys last season. We haven't really seen all that much of them, to be honest with you. Like, use the guys that you've got before you ask for new ones.
Yeah, so there used to be a consultancy that one of the ways that they graded transfers was whether players played in like the first season or what portion of minutes players played in the first. And I was like, this is ridiculous because like I've done this business and I know that half of those players were not signed to play significant portions of minutes this season. They're signed for like 1 season or 2 seasons onward. It's quite different now in that like many teams are stocking up on young talent, hoping that they get the pop, that they go higher. But then like sometimes it's to the extent that like they're not giving them the playing time and the training time and the development time needed for those players to sort of make the leap. So there's a balance inside of that. But yeah, I agree with you that, as we said, Bill has spent a ton of money a few years ago and continued to do that. And then the money tap seems to be off, but somehow the points tap is like on 0.
And they're going to have to replace Bitkins at some point
with no money, which might be difficult for them. Should we talk about Arsenal City? Because it was the biggest game of the weekend. And it was kind of an interesting one because like when you looked at the lineups before the game, it was a very conservative lineup from Arsenal, very attacking one from Man City. But then what we ended up with as the game went on was a much more attacking Arsenal and a very defensive Arteta-style 4-4-2 out of possession from Manchester City. I mean, that said, Arsenal did do like nothing in the first half. Though, again, made some comments about this on Twitter and somebody was talking about how conservative they were. And I was like, that's true. But on the other hand, did you notice that the goal happened because their centre-backs were pressing halfway up the Man City half and Erling Haaland just turns on the jets and bursts through the entire team?
I was like, I don't know if Gabby has like a mild hamstring strain or something like that, but like the difference between him is like, I mean, I could have been behind Erling Haaland and it wouldn't have looked that much different. It's just like crazy. Like, wow, how is he so far ahead of the Arsenal defense? And like, he could see him up there. He just could not kick that gear up. Yeah, I think I said in the newsletter, the player that Haaland reminds me of the most in his willingness to make runs that might become a goal, but don't have to be. He just has this relentless willingness to make the run, to make it at pace, and to hope that his teammates are going to get in the ball. It's Cristiano Ronaldo. Like Ronaldo would make that run so many times, especially far post. He'd just do it over and over and over again. And it paid off, quite a large number of times. Haaland also sees it pay off a large number of times just because he plays with teammates that are good, but he's been very good at helping make goals. And I know that was one of his things that I think internally his management team talked about when they signed Marmoush, he was going to be a little bit more creative. They're going to play big man, little man type stuff. They did it here again. Like you could see that they were often playing a kind of front two-ish, even though Marmoush is out injured. He's been good at it. I don't know if he's great at it. He's great at one thing, but he's been good enough to help City survive. And also, if he wasn't there, like that team would not look like it does at all right now. He has been dragging them on his back through the first half of the season, or first 5 games anyway.
It's like 50% of their shots so far he's taken, something like that. And I mean, it's a great goal in this game. Half time, Eze came on for Marino and Saka came on for Madueke.
It was interesting that Eze really did play the Odegaard role, which I don't think we really expected to see a lot of. And then Arsenal had a good spell of pressure. They racked up some shots. But this game is kind of notable afterwards for the fact that City had 33% of the ball, which is the lowest in Pep's entire career. Entire career. They had 8 touches in the box, which is the lowest in his City career. Arsenal ended the game, I also looked this up, Arsenal ended the game with 39 touches in the City box. And City allowed that many twice last season, against Brentford in the 2-2 and against PSG when they lost 4-2. But they hadn't allowed that many once in the 4 seasons before that. Now, I would say, though, that it was much less concerning in this game than it was last season, right? Because at least in this game, you were like, okay, there's a plan here. I completely understand the plan. And I think after we've been quite critical of how they pressed early in the season, I thought afterwards, like, credit to Pep. Like, they did a good job with this.
Look, he's really, really smart. and he is adaptive, even if people often think that he's not. Like, often, every single year, you see some sort of wrinkle that he's taken from some other place that he's picked up. Like, there might be, games that he watches. He's like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, there was one year when he first went to Germany, he talked about how, like, the Bundesliga is a transition league. And so, like, what we want to do is we want to shut down everybody else's transitions, and then we want to create as many transitions as we could for ourselves. And at one point, that meant, like, moving Xabi Alonso to center back so that he could then, like, be able to chuck long balls out to Douglas Costa, who's on far side, or, the other. It was a thing. And they dominated that league, like, dramatically. He comes to England. He's got old fullbacks. He's like, I don't know. We'll make it work. Did not make it work. Like, they lost the title that season because they didn't have old fullbacks, but also they weren't good at set pieces. And actually, Conte's team was good at set pieces. Brings in set piece coordinator. They've never been good at set pieces. I still think he cannot allow himself to commit to set pieces in the way that they need to. They've much like Bayern don't either. So Kompany, they create so many set piece chances. They just cycle it back around. So weird. But yeah, like, he will take some sort of wrinkle every single season. He will try to figure out his team. Do they need to adjust to this or not? Last year, the Premier League became the most physical transition league in the world. And this is something talked about in sort of like 14, 15, 16, 17. I was like, hey, transitions are still a really big thing. If you can get your teams to be able to play on the break against an unset defense more often, you will get better chances. Finally, that's come through. Long throws have come through. Set pieces have come through. Like, things that we talked about a decade ago have happened. But there are adaptations. And now Pep is like, okay, my team does not have the legs to be able to do what we used to. And in fact, many of the opposing athletes are so good that we can't be able to do the style that we used to all the time. So we've got to have a second or a third option. Their second option was, hey, let me look at my protege who has done this with slightly worse talent or much more injured talent over across the way. And he sees just this very rigid 4-4-2 mid block that happens over and over again. And that they were in this for like probably about 60 minutes in this game. They did drop a little bit further back even than they had before. And it looks so weird on the Pep side. Somebody's like, oh, well, the 4-4-2s existed forever. And Sean Dyche did this. Like, look, I know Sean Dyche did this. Like, I love Sean Dyche. This is not a surprise. But Pep taking this and being like, we're going to actually execute this on a regular basis is stunning.
Well, and it'll be a huge weapon for them in the Champions League. I mean, even if they only do it, well, if he thinks, okay, Rodri's going to get back up to full fitness and we're going to work out a better press and then we will go back to that. Like, even if this is just a temporary thing or a gear they bring out in big away games in the Champions League, like, just having that available is a good thing. And it's funny in this game as well that, of course, when they went back to the traditional City way, they pushed high that's when they concede the equalizer. Like, it was very funny.
Yeah.
But
Martinelli should not have had a
No.
blindside run against the center back and then a fullback kind of pointing. I think it was a fullback. I'm not sure. It could have been somebody that had been pushed back there, but obviously he did. And then the goal took real skill to execute, period. So it wasn't even a huge mistake from the perspective of, oh, we gave up a great chance. That was a giant mistake. They gave up an almost impossible chance that just happened to be a very, very good shot and a great pass that freed him up.
At the same time, they gave up 12 shots here and none of them extra. That is what City gave up in this game. And by the end, Barcelona had every attacker they had available. Now, the wisdom of that is also questionable, but they were doing this and basically putting Gabriel up as an auxiliary centre forward as well. And City handled it pretty well with them. I mean, I found all the narrative around this game incredibly annoying, though, because it was Gary Neville, who I think was
Gary Neville
was around smart as centre forward. There was a brief period. He and a lot of other people were complaining about the way that Arsenal were
building up in the first half, because Arsenal were playing it around the back a lot. And we've seen this a lot so far this season. You've had a kind of middle centre-back. It was Saliba in this game, but you've had Mosquera doing it previously, getting on the ball a lot. And then you've got this kind of floating box in front of them, where you've got Rice, Zubimendi, the third midfielder, and Calafiori. And Neville was calling it a lack of ideas, and I think that was independently true of Arsenal in the final third, where it was like, Madueke will do something. But in the build-up, I didn't think that was true at all. I mean, Arsenal have been rebuilding this squad to be more comfortable in transition. Plus, I think plan A, which is let's go out to the wings high up, we'll combine, we'll get some space. Why would you do that when you don't have Saka and Odegaard, who are the guys who make that work? So what they've been doing this season is trying to manipulate the block, right? So that so when they go forward, they can go fast. As we said last season, they would go forward quite easily. They'd get to the final third, they'd camp out, and they wouldn't be able to do anything. Well, now they've clearly made the decision. I think Billy Carpenter talked about this, that Liverpool were going backwards and forwards a lot more than Arsenal last season. And so he said, but then when Liverpool go forward really fast, they go forward into tons of space, whereas Arsenal are much more lateral. So it seemed to me like the whole aim here was we'll move the block around, wait till there's space, and then we can run through. So I can understand why people feel frustrated about it, but to me, I was like, we're now criticizing a manager for trying to do something to fix the thing that we were criticizing him for last season. Now, it might not be perfect, but I don't think it's an inability to find the forward pass. I think hopefully it will be an improvement.
This is the media talking head problem, and we are not media talking heads. We tend to have worked in football opinions, although Gary Neville worked in football, not quite successfully, but he did it. What if you had to have an opinion and then stick by it, and then are you an idiot or not, right? That's what you would have a testable opinion. That's sort of a scientific hypothesis. And gambling kind of has this. And coaches have this. I have to have an opinion about how my opponent is going to play in this match. I have to have an opinion about our best way to nullify their attack and also to break down their defense. And then potentially I have to adjust how we're playing on the fly based off of whether that's being successful or not. You don't get a chance to play both sides of it really as a coach, because the results and the underlying process sort of teaches you a lot. But the media gets to do that. So they're like, well, he didn't do this, and so therefore, and it didn't work out, therefore he was dumb. Or he didn't do this, and that didn't work out, even though it worked out last year, and so he was dumb. He should have expected that they would adapt to that and then figured out something new that would have then given but the reality is, if you had to say, I think Arsenal will do this, or I think this will be the successful way that they will attack against this team, and therefore this is the plan that they should pursue. And then you watch that play out in front of you, and you say, actually, they're nullifying this, or they're not finding space for that, or they're missing this player. And so you just can see that they're not getting progression from that area of the pitch like they usually do. So they have to do something else. That's how football actually works. But the media acts like, oh, these coaches are either idiots or geniuses every single week. And it's just not fucking true. It doesn't change like that.
Well, and this is, I hear what you're saying, because it does just feel like this is, when you have this opinion that doesn't change with information coming in, it's not a hypothesis, it's an ideology. And I don't know, it just feels like it gets
It's a Russell
nowhere.
Martin.
It's a Russell Martin, yeah. The most rigid ideologue that we can think of. But I don't know. Anyway, I think that if you're watching Arsenal this season, this is something to watch. This is something interesting to see when they make the decision to go forward, having done this possession around the back, with Saliba on the ball a lot. Are they going into more space? Are they able to advance quickly once they go into the opponent's half? That's the question that I'd have in mind for this side. Not, are they just like neglecting to pass the ball forwards because of, I don't know, courage or something, a lack of courage. Anyway,
Lack of.
well, this is what it gets framed as. It's like, these guys are out of ideas. It's like, are you serious? Like, there's one thing this Arsenal team is like very comfortable at. It's kind of grinding very, very slowly up the field. They will do that all day, and City will just let them do it. Like, they don't care.
Yeah.
But Arsenal
Like,
need to create
don't
some
put your
chances.
skill players 1v1 against our players that seem to be in big trouble every single time that happens against other teams. Like that. Yeah. Please, no, anything but that. Just no. It's much more dangerous for you to like kick the ball up through each of the thirds and then gradually try to attack us with more numbers. No, that you're right. I don't do that to us. Like, that'll be very dangerous eventually. In like 3 games time, you'll break through.
I want to talk about that again. That was, this sort of tactical chess match of the weekend that I think we will love watching. Manchester United versus Chelsea.
See, honestly, I thought you were going to say Bournemouth versus Newcastle.
Could be anything, right? Like, as I was saying it, I was like, Fulham, Brentford. Like, it could be Fulham, by the way. I mean, this is just a bill. It's like,
Fulham to me are like the perfect encapsulation of how good the Premier League is. Because I look at Fulham and I think they had a pretty bad summer. Nobody expects them to trouble the top of the table in any serious way. Nobody expects them to get relegated. They're like perfectly mid. And you watch them and you're like, this is a good team, man. They've got tons of good players doing good stuff. The Iwobi assist for Harry Wilson's goal and the finish as well, but the assist is out of this world. I gather you're a little bit worried about Brentford.
Yeah, I think so. But also, I will point out that Fulham scored, 1 real goal in this game, and then the other 2 were just absolute gifts given up by Brentford. And in fact, it was 3 defensive mistakes that created all 3 of those goals. Yeah, I think bees are not looking comfortable at all. Maybe like fractionally more comfortable than a Villa or a Wolves or a West Ham. But no, note that I didn't say any of the relegated team or promoted teams there. Like that's also interesting. These myths that happen, like it could happen by the end of the season that obviously, all but Leeds are sort of down there again, but everybody gloms on to like the new thing. And like, that's the thing that is true about the league, right? So it was the big 3 and then the big 4 and then the big 6, right? And now like nobody knows. And it was, it's impossible to go up and stay up. And like, like just promoted teams are going to get relegated back down every single time. And that hasn't been true historically. And then maybe like we had a 2-year run where it seemed like it's true. And then this year they're like, seems like the teams that we thought were like a little risky and making some bad choices year after year and grinding things out and talent leaks like a Wolves might be in trouble, like for real. And they could still pull it out, but like it's very competitive at least. Like Villa, I think, is the real unknown there. Brentford, you look at their window. They did not want to sell Vissa. They did want to sell Mbeumo. They needed. They weren't sure about Thiago because like he basically spent an injury year out, and then Norgard is gone too, and then obviously Thomas Frank goes, and there's just like big transition. There's so many risk elements inside of that team that I think that they're trying to adapt to it. They're trying to just play solid, but by playing solid, they're like 8 shots to 14 shots, which is real bad. And then like if you don't have those game breakers that are happening legit up top, like if you're easy to defend, teams will start to tee off on you a lot more often. So yeah, I think they have some real concerns. I don't know what the source of it is yet. Like they'll try and figure it out, but definitely a worry. And Fulham, yeah, I think they are what they say on the tin. They're going to play boring most of the time. They're going to grind out some pretty decent, wins, but they're also going to have to grind out some pretty unimpressive losses and figure they'll be somewhere between 8th and 13th at the end of the year.
They're the most Portuguese team in the league. I mean, like, which is funny to say with Wolves in the league, but they are just like what a good Portuguese team looks like. I think they have like a classic mid block. They're really hard to break down. They've just got like some decent players. Nobody there is like an astonishing talent, But
when was the last
everyone's
time you
pretty good.
saw a crazy Adama highlight? I think I saw one last year. Like
Yeah.
it feels like either he's just disappeared in Fulham. Like I see Iwobi highlights every week, and I see
My boy.
yeah, and who's the double-barreled kid that's there that's blonde? Arsenal.
Emil
Academy.
Smith-Rowe.
Yeah, so Smith Rowe like pops up from time to time, although like his health seems to be a bit rough, and I don't know, they're just fine, and sometimes they're a little better than fine, but really, you know, it helps when other teams gift you goals. Speaking of gifts, that's actually a very good point to talk about Manchester United and Chelsea.
Manchester United and Chelsea. We said that this run of fixtures would tell us more about Chelsea. They drew with Brentford. They lost to Bayern. They've now lost to Manchester United. 2.4 expected goals for, 5.4 against across those games. Okay, you have to factor in 40 minutes down a man. And also, like, okay, 5th-minute red card, quite bad. And then Maresca makes a quite reasonable decision to just take off all of his attackers. Esteval comes off, Pedro Neto comes off, Cole Palmer comes off. But it meant that by the time United were down to 10 at half-time, he was like, oh, shit, like, who are we going to throw on now? And like they just put on anybody they had available to them. Then in the second half, okay, you're defeated by having the penalty. You need 2 goals and 3 shots and a little over 3 expected goals in the second half, which is pretty much the same he did versus 11 in the first half. I mean, like that is worrying that they could do literally nothing in this game. Like another thing.
But each team lost their worst player, and so like they really ended up being pretty even, right? Like, you know, get Casemiro off, and you're like, United might have improved. Like Sanchez off, Maresca's been forced into a good decision. I'm not sure the subs were good decisions, but the rest of it was.
I don't even know what to make of these teams. I mean, like Man United, I think are like slightly better than we thought they might be. Not because of this game, obviously, but because they can at least get shots.
Top half of the table, I think.
Chelsea feel kind of like what Arsenal's critics say Arsenal are. Like they're kind of boring, and you know they have these games every now and then where they rip teams apart. But then other games, you think this team will never ever score a goal ever again unless Cole Palmer does it, produces magic out of nowhere.
Well, I feel like they play weirdly in their positions as well. So
okay.
I mean, Enzo, when he was profiled, was an outstanding defensive midfielder, right? Like pressing, could go everywhere. Caicedo is better than that because he does things on the passing side of it too. But like between the two of them, like if you're playing a 4-2-3-1 with your fullbacks doing stuff, and if you had like a legit sort of front four, like, that's an impossible group to break down versus almost anybody else from a talent perspective in the league. So like, you know, the 4-2-3 part, like you've got Cole Palmer in his position where he needs to be. And then it's the 3 that you're like, And last year they were problems when they were healthy, and then they sold 2 of those players, and like they kept the guy that was actually much worse than. It's just a weird thing. But so instead, in order to attack, they sort of like put the diamond in the middle, and it's a 4-1 sort of 3-1 effectively. They push Enzo into that 8 role. So like now you've got 2 8s or sort of 8 10s, and Palmer's definitely a 10. And then you get the wide still triangle. But he's not suited for it. And he does score some goals, but it just creates this weird imbalance all the time. And so like it feels like they're fighting through a bit of treacle as to how they should be playing versus like what they have in strength positionally. And obviously they also have the goalkeeper issue that I've promised I'm not writing about Sanchez anymore in the newsletter. I'm like, I'm just done with it. I'm just going to appreciate the vibes. Like this is, in fact, I'm going to talk about it in the most positive way from now on. Like Robert Sanchez looked great in build up from, you know, Chelsea. Like they had no issues whatsoever. Unfortunately, the red card meant that, you know, they were already down a man. And it was Sanchez that happened to create it, but it wasn't to say that he had a bad game or anything like that. I think that that's my philosophy going forward. At least maybe this way, if I couch it in sugar, Chelsea fans will swallow it much more acceptably than they did last year when I was complaining about exactly the same thing.
They spent so much money this summer. Like they did like 600 mil in and out, and they've playing exactly the same goalkeeper, got exactly the same problems. Like, I just don't understand this team. Okay, I think shifting Madueke now, you could be more positive and you can say, if they love
Esteban
Esteban
looks real
and
good.
they think he's the star of the future, like, fine, fair enough. Like, that's okay. If you want to get things out of his path. Joao Pedro, I've been very positive about him, but I mean, he looks good at all the things except for getting shots right now, which I consider to be a little bit of a problem for them.
He wouldn't be out of place at Manchester United in the center forward role.
Boy, there are so many strikers right now. It makes me think of, there was a period in the mid 2010s where people kept making sitcoms where the aim was apparently to make you cry and not laugh. And I feel that way about a lot of center forwards right now. They're like, well, if we get a center forward who does all this stuff, but what he doesn't do is get shots or expected goals. So we've got like Šeško, Gyökeres, Joao Pedro, like all these guys who are just like doing absolutely nothing in front of goal currently. I kind of love it.
Bring back Darwin.
Yeah,
I will say on the transfer grades, we got a little bit of pushback on. So we grade, the way that we graded them is like we grade the incoming business and sort of the prices and what it looks like. We grade the outgoing business and the prices and what it looks like, right? And then we try and combine that into an overall grade. But then there's always context around the overall grade, right? And possibly we should have been more negative about someone like Chelsea, where the business on the surface actually looks pretty good, right? The incomings and outgoings, you're like, these actually look much more sensible than they did before. Like it adds up to something that, like, financially kind of interesting, from a trading perspective, kind of interesting. There's this final level though, which is like, did you get better or worse as a football team? And that doesn't always come across in the transfer grades. That usually comes across in the criticism. It sometimes comes across in the previews. Like, clearly Chelsea did not get better this season as a footballing entity. Future seasons, possibly. Like they got so many assets that were young that could add up to something from Strasbourg and move on over. And I think that, yeah, will they probably be cusp of the Champions League, the fourth, fifth space? Likely when it all plays out. But I just don't see them as being better than that. And it feels like at this point, with all the money that's been thrown around, they should be. And you're right, they're boring. And that sucks for the fans.
Okay, well, I think that kind of brings us to
United
the
aren't
end
entirely boring, though.
Oh, I mean, sure. I mean, like when you're not very good, I think that helps.
Come on, say so. Look,
they've just got a bunch of guys who shoot from everywhere.
Positive goal difference.
Every time I see Mbeumo, I'm just like, stop shooting from there. Like, stop it. He gets the ball on the edge of the box and he cuts inside and he shoots from there. And I'm just like, it's not gonna happen. Like, you can't do that all the time. He'll score a few probably this season. And after every one, what you'll get in the next game is 3 or 4 more shots like that. It's just there are so many chuckers on this team. Like, there are so many guys. Like, when you've got Cunha and Šeško and Mbeumo and Bruno all on the pitch at the same time, just like, this is like
balls.
Horrible shot quality. Yeah, exactly.
This is like a testicular cancer recovery ward.
They could do what they want. Like, it's fine. Mazraoui, I will say Mazraoui was very important to their progression in this game, and I do think Mazraoui is useful.
Always is. We like Mazraoui. Come on. Okay. Yeah, you're just going to let the testicular cancer recovery word sit there, because I guess we had like some choppiness, and usually that would have stopped you in your tracks and you would have stared at me and then not acknowledged that it happened. Not enough balls. That was all. Yeah. Look, no. I want to say this about Manchester United, because like I have to say something positive while we can. And it's not that often. They faced Arsenal. They faced Chelsea. They faced Fulham away. They faced City away. And they faced Burnley at home. Like, tough start to the season. Yes, they had a 40-minute red card sort of bonus in there, but like, who hasn't really? Like Liverpool had a much bigger one at Newcastle. 0.28 expected goals to the positive. Look like they're not completely incompetent. I mean, the defensive side is a little scary, but I don't know. I just wanted to, while I had a moment, I felt like I needed to like throw them a bone, because it looks vaguely competent for the moment.
Okay, look, we can't say positive things about Manchester United, but I think I've got to draw things to a close there. But I would like to ask you one question before we get out of here. Like, last week, obviously, asked you a little bit about business of working in data in football, and we were talking about set pieces, and the value of maybe going and studying those if you are somebody looking to get into this area. One thing I wanted to ask you this week is whether you think there's stuff
that stats and data-minded people neglect when they're engaging with the sport? Obviously you get a lot of people asking you about how they can make a career in the game. We met a bunch of them when we had drinks earlier in the year. And it does sort of feel like when you, maybe it's just when you engage with football online, but there are people who are like the kind of tacticos, like Spielverlagerung kind of school. And then on the other side, you get the data people. And I know it's not as clear as all that, but clearly there are people on the tactical side who neglect stuff on the data side. We've got to assume there are people on the data side doing the same thing. So do you meet young analysts who you think have neglected some portion of the learning process?
One of the things that became clear early on was that academics who did not know ball were really struggling to make a difference inside of football analytics. And it's natural for academics who like the game to like dabble and start to apply models and play with data. And Moneyball in soccer/football has been a thing that's existed for quite a long time, but it wasn't widespread until probably maybe, I don't know, 5 to 7 years ago is probably where it really spread out. A decade ago, it was still pretty controversial. Knowing and understanding the game of football and how it actually works, like, will teach you a lot about where your models might have holes. And all models are wrong, but some models are useful, right? So all data models are wrong because they've taken out the world of context and they've sort of squished it down into like one little thing or many little things and gotten rid of some of it, though, because you have to in order to make the model work, because you can't have the most complex thing. In fact, like we had models in the early days around passing models, back in like 2014, where we had so many leagues of data and so many passes. We had like 10 years of historic data across, I don't know, 20, 30 competitions. And sometimes the model just wouldn't complete. It's just like, oh, the computer ran out of RAM. And so we couldn't continue to like adjust how many players there are and how many passes there are and how many different computational elements there are inside of this model that factor is like moderately important. So there have been issues over time, like, and even now, like the data has gotten more complicated. So you still have to make sure that you strip out the stuff that isn't important, or when you're working with tracking data, which is even harder. So knowing football really helps you to, one, fill back in some of the stuff the models might be missing and make sense of it. And this is true in the gambling side of it as well. So yes, understanding like how football works is like a big deal. And some people who just want to play with models, like I see some people on the internet like, oh, this is my new model here, and this is my new model here, and this is my new model here. Like, what does this actually teach you? Like, how am I applying this is like a really big question. And because I've been in the world of gambling for 20 years, like how I'm applying this is super important, because there's always money on the line. Like, and even inside of being inside of a sports book, like if you're applying it wrong and then people are able to tee off on those lines, like you're again losing money. Like there's either side of it. If you're betting on things or if you're taking bets, there's always the opportunity to lose money if your models are wrong, or if there are things that you don't understand in football that then the real world is saying, hey, this is a big deal. And somebody then gets to bet on that over and over and over again. So when people are producing these different types of models to evaluate a skill, does that skill matter? If it doesn't matter, like, why are you working on it? And if it does matter, how are you proving that it matters? Like, all of those are really important questions. And what I've been fascinated in recent times, and I actually got I got a note from Daryl Morey, who's the, I don't know, president of basketball operations at Philadelphia 76ers, involved in, noted for Morey ball, which is one of the things that got the credit for changing how the NBA plays. He's like, it's really weird that the stuff that we were talking about, like sort of 8 to 10 years ago, has pretty much all come true in recent seasons. And I was like, I agree with you. That's weird. Like, I agree partly because it took so long, partly that is happening kind of at inflection points. So like this thing happens and everything spreads out. This thing happens and everything spreads out, and everybody adopts it very quickly. English language is still very much the first place this is getting adopted, which I find sort of surprising and impressive. The tactical guys are a little bit more, at least historically, what the journalists that I complained about earlier are, where they would sort of post facto explain everything in a match. And sometimes it'd be 3,000 words, sometimes it'd be 6,000 words. And this is exactly how everything worked in this way. And this is how they should have adapted. And you're like, wow, this is too much information. I don't know how to apply this. It's not actually that useful to me. The other way is true. This is too little information. I don't know how to apply this. This isn't useful for me. So different sides of the spectrum, but end up sort of coming up with the same problematic conclusions at either end.
So when you talk about the models and the models and just kind of messing around with the data and not necessarily understanding how those things translate into a player being effective or a team being effective, how did you approach that when it came to stuff like, dribble and carry OBV, pass OBV? Like,
how do you go and like check that stuff to see that you are measuring important things? Is it just like eye test against it, or what?
When so people won't know much probably about the history of radars, but like I've written, I don't know, tens of
Mhm.
thousands of words on the development of this type of visualization and also on the choices of the different stats that go on this visualization.
Yeah.
And the early days, they probably mattered less. Now they probably matter more, but not all of these stats are equal, right? And that's one of the issues with radars. But the problem with the first versions of these were they look like XYZ, and we put the absolute numbers. So Cristiano Ronaldo had a season where he took like 7 shots a game,
Mhm.
and Lionel Messi had a season where he had like just some stupid amount of XG and XG created or XG assisted, and you're like, everybody else looks terrible, even if they're like well above average compared to the
Mhm.
absolutes on these guys. And so that's when I started to apply 2 standard deviations to this. Effectively, 95th percentile is close to that.
Mhm.
That's the edge of the thing, so that average players would at least be able to look normal, and then above average players would stand out in certain ways. But when I started choosing the different stats for different positions, I would talk to people that were experts in this, and then I had been working in football gambling for a long time. I watched like so many games during that period of time because
Mhm.
it felt useful for me to be able to watch games and then apply the principles to all these games. And so,
Okay.
what did a good fullback need to do? What does a good attacking wide forward need to do? Right footed or left footed? So, applying these concepts, talking to people in football, talking to coaches about like, hey, what is the archetype? Looking at elite players in all of their data mix and saying, what do they actually do? And then trying to look at sort of these cross league elements. What does a good striker in this league do? What does a good striker in this league do? What does a good center back do is harder. Defensive
Mhm.
midfielder is pretty interesting. Goalkeepers are their own weird entity because goalkeepers, basically everything is forced upon them from the opponent, including their passing, because how much you press is significant in goalkeeper passing options. And so it was really about taking a lot of outside football knowledge as well as my own knowledge and then trying to apply that into which data do we think might matter, and then doing the data research on top of that to say, okay, which things are definitely correlated to stuff that we care about, which is, expected goals in attack, expected goals conceded. If you care about style of play, like possession was one of those ones where people were like, oh, possession is correlated to winning. And you're like, yeah, well, we're sort of in the possession era, and it doesn't have to be coordinated to winning. Like there are
Mhm.
other teams that are able to sort of spoof this style, but usually teams that are better have more of the ball, that have better talent. And so like, there are things that are confounders inside of it that we really had to work on and say, this is like a proxy in a useful way, but it's not
Sure.
actually useful by itself.
So this must be, you guys obviously made a real effort to go and like develop a kind of best in class expected goals product. Like, I mean, I'm not saying you weren't doing that in other regards, but with expected goals, you did go beyond where a bunch of other models have gone still. So that then paid dividends when it came to creating these other kind of metrics as well, because it was a way for you to like benchmark quality in OBV and things too.
Yeah, exactly. So the expected goals was kind of always the baseline, and we kept adding stuff into our data at StatsBomb. We created
Mhm.
it from scratch. We used, Opta's early stuff as like the baseline for it, but then we kept saying, okay, there are holes in this model because the data doesn't exist. How do we create the data that makes it
Mhm.
better? And so we added the location of the defenders on every shot from freeze frames. We added the location of the goalkeeper because goalkeeper obviously matters a lot and he gets to use his hands. And then we added like, the height of the ball, which people were like, I don't know if that even matters. Like, well, it kind of does actually. Like, and as long as you know the ball is on the ground or sort of like above X height, like, but that area in the middle is like funky as well. So we just kept adding stuff that seemed like it should be in a more robust model of the game that you knew was problematic because it didn't exist. And so you'd go talk to coaches, and the coach is like, I got 2 guys that are bodying this guy that's going for a header. It's a bad shot. Like, he might get lucky with it, but like from a process perspective, like that's good for us. Or the Sean Dyche problem at Burnley. where they always had so many players between the shot and the goal that like it just was not nearly as good a shot at any point that people thought it was or the model thought it was.
There are so many directions I'm going to go in this, but I think we're going to save stuff for some upcoming weeks. It's always really interesting to hear you talk about this stuff because there were so many different layers to it that you have to go through to arrive at the point that you're actually producing something here. It sounds like what you're saying is in the amateur space, I guess this is inevitable. People have jobs and other things to do. But in the amateur space, maybe some people are trying to skip to the last stage rather than making their way through some of the earlier ones.
I started out as a guy with a job, right? And I started out hand copying stats from, websites and putting them into spreadsheets and then adding them to R. And so like, I understand what it's like. It is one of those areas where like knowledge really does compound. And some people who I thought were very naive in the early days are really quite good because they've managed to learn a lot from smart people over time and they were open and they managed to do their own exploration too. I was talking to James York, who helped teach the courses with me at StatsBomb back in the day. And we're like, wow, so many of these kids or these guys that were just, people that we taught, like have real titles in football, like director of this, director of that. Like they're quite notable. And it's been interesting to see it develop there, but it's certainly an area that, you'll make mistakes. The first time you do this stuff, you'll make lots of mistakes. If you make mistakes in public, at least you learn faster, even if it's terrifying, even if people criticize you. Like I often would release early versions of Viz on a temporary basis to get feedback into like Twitter, because it still ended up being the fastest way I could get bulk levels of feedback. And I could then discard all the things that I was pretty sure were wrong or didn't have enough understanding. But then some people were like, oh, I like this or I like that, and maybe just think about that. And it was always very valuable. But yeah, this type of knowledge compounds over a really long time. And it is multi-layered. Like you learn stuff from coaches, you learn stuff from players. You ask a question from a thing that's been bugging you, and then you try and find out why it looks like that. And I mean, that's just science at the end of the day. But in a sense, it's also football. Thing has been bugging me. How do we solve that problem? Like, or this thing that team does has bugs us a lot. So how do we solve that problem? And eventually, sometimes it gets solved and you're like, is that a player thing or is that a tactical thing that we can repeat from game to game, like, or from team to team?
Yeah. And the fun side of it is that kind of what you were getting at before, I think, with like the post-match like tactical analysis, is that you're never doing it in a closed system. Like it's an outcome that you're doing this and you're doing this against somebody who is actively fighting back against you, which means it is kind of like definitely deep, I suppose. Look, I really like talking to you about this stuff, but if you're watching this and you know a bit more about analytics than I do and you're annoyed at my stupid questions, then please do send in the questions that you would like me to ask Ted, because it's a good opportunity to discuss this stuff as we are learning about these teams early in the season. Thank you very much to everybody for being here today.
If you would like to check out the transfer grades, which we touched on earlier, please do make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter. You can check out back issues of it, I suppose, online too. But we will have some more of those coming out shortly, as I said, around the big teams in Europe. We will be back later in the week. We are, of course, also talking about a third episode.
It'll be in October though. You haven't missed it yet. It'll be in October. We have to wait for Rishi to come back off of vacation. Also, is Hayden this week or is Neil?
I think it's Neil this week.
Oh, see, you were talking shit about Hayden's grade and he can't even come defend himself. You're that type of guy. What type
I
of
talk
friend
shit
are you?
to his face. I said it in the Slack. I was like, what the fuck is this, Hayden? And he's so good natured. He's so I said an unrepeatable thing, but it's fine. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please leave us a 5-star review in your favorite podcast app, and we will catch you later in the week. Bye-bye.
Later. Goodbye.